death threats, assaults, online intimidation, and concern that harm could come to their families. That's the reality that Canadian politicians are facing every day, and it's only getting worse. I'm Mercedes Stevenson. The West Block starts now.
What are you doing in Alberta?
From the Deputy Prime Minister to the NDP leader, threats against politicians of all stripes are on the rise. So much so the RCMP have ratcheted up protection like never before. We have an exclusive interview with their first threat profiler.
With the dramatic escalation in threats against politicians, the RCMP has had to go back to the drawing table, finding new ways to operate and new methods to strengthen protection and security measures.
Liberal MP Pam Damoff is not seeking re-election because of the threats and harassment she's experienced. Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman has been seen with a protective detail on Parliament Hill. Federal Justice Minister Arif Virani moves with a mobile duress alarm and works with multiple security teams at the Department of Justice and the House of Commons. In the face of dramatically increasing threats to politicians, the RCMP has added new protection tools to their ammunition.
Joining us now is Michele Paradis, RCMP Assistant Commissioner for Protective Policing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
You must have just an incredibly busy profile right now. What is the threat picture that you're seeing in protective policing?
I think it's been, for us, we've seen requests for service that have increased exponentially. This is an unprecedented time for us, and global events have changed how and who we protect here in Canada. So I think that although we're busy, I think we're rising to the ability to be able to look at it as a whole and, based on threat and risk, apply what we need to those people that are at the greatest risk.
I'm curious to know where the threats are coming from, and I have a few thoughts. I mean, obviously, there's always the people who it's a lone wolf or it's grievance-based, but also it seems increasingly like there's concerns about state threats. For example, the RCMP was providing protection to Irwin Cotler, who's a great human rights defender in this country and former parliamentarian. Where are you seeing these threats stemming from?
We're seeing them right across the board, whether it's here in Canada, whether it's online, whether it's somebody in their basement in another country. They're coming in at a rate that we've never seen. However, that means that we have to be as vigilant and look at where we can best put our protection. And so we've utilizing a threat and risk based model that the highest risk will be who we will be protecting. But if that risk is mitigated, then we'll shift again. And we have, now that we have the behavioral sciences piece, that we're able to look at, are people escalating what they're sending in? Can we stop something before it even happens? I don't want it to get to the point of something happening. I want to make sure that if it's criminal, we action it. If it's awful but lawful, we also action it.
You mentioned awful but lawful, and I think a lot of people say, yes, the vitriol has gone up, but does that translate to threat? How do you handle that, and how has the RCMP been involving? Because it used to be, unless there was a physical attack or evidence that it was imminent, nothing was happening. If you're looking at that awful but lawful side, what does that mean?
It means that if it reaches the stage of criminality, I will kill you, then we will lay charges. But if it's, I hope you get run over by a bus, that doesn't reach the threshold of criminality. But it does mean that whoever that was directed towards does feel some kind of angst around themselves. So we will go and make a door knock and say, we're aware of you. And a lot of times that's enough to stop that. And it's not, you know, we're policing the state. This is making sure that whether it's our politicians or public leaders, that they have the ability to be able to do their jobs free from any threat. And also candidates who may be looking at the next election can say, I'll put my name in, not, oh, I'm not going to do this because I don't feel safe.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know if that's something you hear from people who need your protection, that either they're afraid to run because they may be targeted or their families may be targeted, or they're in office and they're rethinking whether they want to stay a politician because of this.
Yes, and that's absolutely part. We've not seen that before, and we're starting to see it more and more. And it really does have an effect on our democratic institutions. If the right people are not running for the right reasons, then how can we say that our democracy is free and unbiased?
When we talk about people who have a grievance or who are angry and the propensity for political violence, in the last 6 or so months, we've seen some really concerning developments there. 2 attempted assassinations of now President-elect Donald Trump, one of which missed him very narrowly and injured his ear. Of course, just a few days ago, we saw a blatant assassination of a healthcare CEO in downtown Manhattan, walking out of his hotel. And the reaction in both of these cases was what kind of caught my attention, that it almost seemed like, well, I don't like Donald Trump, so he deserved it. Or, well, healthcare companies, you know, they don't do the right thing for people sometimes, so this is a hero for the people. Are you worried about the kind of dialogue that's out there when it comes to condoning violence against high-profile figures?
I am worried that people will become emboldened by these type of actions. But from my side in Protective, it's saying that we're out there and we're monitoring everything to make sure that what we may have learned from the assassination attempt on Donald Trump is reintegrated into our training. Any best practices that we see right across the world, we're going to incorporate that in how we train and how we stay vigilant. So things change and shift in narratives, but for us, it's getting an overall view of really what we're seeing and what's affecting the people that we have as clients.
What did you learn when you look at this as the Assistant Commissioner for Protective Policing from the Trump attempted assassination or the unfortunately successful assassination of the CEO in New York?
I think that one of the things that we can't say, you know, this agency did this or that. What I can say is there are lessons that are learned in any of these, and that we have to incorporate them as we move forward. You know, if you take the assassination of former Japanese President Abe, that was a homemade gun, and that didn't sound like a normal gun, and therefore the protection officers didn't react in accordance with what they had been trained. We've now incorporated that into our training. So that's part and parcel of that. You mentioned earlier about the lone wolf. They will always be out there, but what I want is for our officers to be trained in a way that they are constantly vigilant and their head is basically on a swivel. It's not complacency. It's about changing to meet the threat environment.
Well, in dealing too, I mean, you mentioned the homemade gun, but the ghost gun in the New York case, which is unclear how much came off the internet, how much might have been 3D printing, but all these new technologies that are enabling people to operate differently, that's a huge demand on you. It's a huge demand for service. You're looking at protecting more people in more places than you ever have before. Do you have the resources with officers to do that?
Absolutely. We're almost completely fully staffed right now, but given what is occurring, what's coming up, what a G7, an election, with more and more people having and asking for protection, we are seeing an increase, and we're adjusting and looking at what are we going to need in the future. So we're looking at least 120 new members over the next little while, and further recruiting and bringing that staff up to be able to meet what we're anticipating in the future.
What are you seeing in terms of folks who are in these units now? I know in the U.S. there's been a lot of burnout. It's a tough job. It's very demanding. You're away from home a lot. You're, as you say, head on a swivel, constantly looking. Someone's life is in your hands. Are you concerned about burnout with your officers?
I'm always concerned about that, but what I can say is that their professionalism shows through, and most of them are very, very proud of what they do, and they're great spokespeople. So we actually have a lineup of people wanting to come and join the protective unit, and you know it's a unique skill set. It's a little bit like a firefighter. Hurry up and wait for the fire. You're anticipating something's going to happen all the time. Burnout, yes, is something, but getting that balance and the well-being of our members is front and center.
One of the concerns that I've heard from some members who work in protective policing that wanted me to ask this when I had someone in front of me who might have the opportunity, and now I do, was about standards. They want more officers, but they're worried that could result in a lowering of standards to recruit them. Is that something you're looking at?
Lowering of standards, absolutely not. I think given the threat environment and the constant change, we need to be on the cutting edge of how we provide training and world-class protection. That is not, standards will not be lowered. Standards actually will be higher, and they will be a continuous learning based on going from the unknown to the known, understanding what you need to, then building on, building on, building on. So it's going to be a constant evolving of training to be able to meet what's going on throughout our environment.
How difficult is it to provide protection when you're talking about a more sophisticated adversary like Iran or India who are targeting Canadians?
I think that's part of what we look at every day. We can't just say that the world is the same as when I joined Protective when I first came onto the RCMP. The world has changed, and we've had to change as well. And that means looking at outside forces that may want to cause harm to some of our clients here in Canada, staying up on that, being lockstep with our national security team. We've never seen this before, where we have been as closely joined at the hip on how we provide protection.
You have an election. Well, we all have an election coming up sometime in under a year, we assume. It could happen at any given moment, likely next fall. What are you doing to be prepared for that, where you're now not only going to have to protect perhaps more people, because of course vitriol and tensions can go up around an election, but politicians who want to dive into crowds and shake hands and are moving around sometimes to multiple provinces in a day?
Well, I can tell you right now, our plan's already fully completed. Names are plugged in. We know if it's called tomorrow, we're ready for it. Yes, but we've done this before. We have, been to multiple provinces in a day. We've been to multiple cities. We've worked with various. We'll keep teams together for those people that we're covering. We're working with the police of jurisdiction to say, if you've got candidates in your area, this is how you're going, how we're going to interact with you to be able to keep them safe. And whether it's called now in the fall, before or after the G7, we're ready.
Assistant Commissioner Paradis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.